for those of you that don't know me, my name's Julie Arvelize. I'm the owner of Peace Frogs Travel. I also have with me Michelle DeBon, who's showing up as Julie Arvelize, but she's not me. There's not two of me.
Oh.
Thank goodness. And then also Claire Fornaro, our travel concierge. I did start my travel career traveling in Australia. I was there for nearly a year. I was on a shoestring budget, so none of the places that Anna's going to share with us tonight are places that I had the luxury of staying, but I sure as heck would like to go back and stay at all of these amazing places. You know, when I was in Australia, it was over 26 years ago. I was a backpacker, and it was an incredible experience for me. It's an amazing country, and the people are friendly and kind and super laid back. You know, all of us with the coronavirus are now working at home, and we have a lot more time to do the things that we love to do. At least that seems to be the case, you know, from a home standpoint, and we're not working as much because we haven't been able to. And I would say that was a significant piece of being in Australia. When it's time to work, they work hard, and when it's time to play, they play hard. I do feel like that kind of was a really great way, a great lifestyle, and I really loved my time there. I traveled to kind of follow the sun. I arrived in Sydney in July, which is their winter. It was lovely in July. It wasn't extremely cold. It was a bit rainy. So I hopped on a plane and went up to Darwin. There I went down to Ayers Rock, which is now called by its Aboriginal name of Uluru. I was there long enough ago that I was able to actually climb to the top of Ayers Rock, which you can no longer do, but that was, you know, exciting at the time. I went and worked on a dive boat in Queensland. I learned how to dive. I worked on a dive boat, and I was on a charter that went up to Lizard Island. Anne's going to talk about it up there. But that was really exclusive, private, amazing experience. And then I spent time in the south, in Melbourne, Canberra, and Sydney.
Tell us some more about your year in Australia.
My adventure.
A dive. Wow.
Yeah, so probably, I mean, one of the main reasons that I chose Australia was because I really loved the ocean and was super excited to learn how to dive. So I took my open water PADI class in Cairns, which is up in Queensland. And when you learn to dive in a place that's not Central Virginia, you get to actually do all your, you know, you start in a pool. And I went out on a boat to do my test dives, and I fell in love with diving. And so I was broke, and diving is expensive. So I basically became what would you call it, a scullery maid. I worked in the kitchen and cleaned bathrooms and just did anything they needed me to do. And they gave me free room and board. And then I was able to get my advanced open water diving. And I lived on this boat for, I think, at least a month. And then I went in and worked in a restaurant in Cairns and lived with some of the employees of the dive company.
Wow.
And then we would just go out diving whenever we had time. So I spent a lot of time diving and working on a dive boat and taking people on dive boats, on dives, and doing resort dives. It was pretty incredible. You got to know the fish. You knew where the eels were. You could always sort of amaze people by saying, oh, there's a moray eel that lives here, and find the moray eel. And yeah, so it was awesome.
We're just going to have a quick journey through Australia, and exciting to kind of hear some of what Julie's done in her past travels. Sydney, as you can see, is very much sort of evolved around the harbour, and unlike many other cities in Australia, it sort of grew up in a very higgledy-piggledy fashion because it was the first area that was settled. Australia, for those of you who are not as familiar, is basically the same size as the United States, with the exception of Alaska and Hawaii, and 80% of the population live on the east coast. So coming down on the east coast, is where you'll find the greatest concentration of our population. The areas that I've marked here are just the areas that we're kind of just going to explore today and just have a quick look at them. Our currency is different. We definitely have the Australian dollar. So US currency is not accepted when traveling in Australia. The money is made from a form of plastic, so it's rather unusual. And we don't have any 1 cent pieces in our currency. The small coins that you see in the foreground are actually the $2 coins, and then the larger ones are the $1 coins. So it's very deceiving again. You think that the smaller coin would be the $1, but it's not. And just be careful always with our currency, because it's sort of plastic. It can be a bit sort of, it takes a while to get used to it. Sydney, as I mentioned, the life of the city very much revolves around the harbour. The green area that you see here in the foreground behind the Opera House are the botanical gardens, and that's a very, very integral part of the city. Opera House is a UNESCO World Heritage Site, and there are many, many different ways to visit the Opera House. The concert hall is just one of 7 performance spaces within the Opera House. So there are drama theatres, studios, concert hall, opera theatre, just a variety of different options. And as I said, many really different and fun ways to explore the Opera House. You can now actually even take a walk-on role in an opera. So you spend the morning at the opera studio in a suburb of Sydney, getting sort of fitted out with the right costume, and then makeup and everything is done at the Opera House, and you take a walk-on role in an opera. So for somebody who wants to be a star, it's kind of a great experience. We have many very historic sort of sandstone buildings throughout the city, and big statues, all of which reflect our early British heritage. This is the Art Gallery of New South Wales on the left, and then the Queen Victoria Building on the right. But overall, I think it's fair to say that Sydney is a very contemporary, cosmopolitan city. This area here that we're looking at is called Circular Quay, and this is where all of the ferries depart from to cross the harbour to residential areas, to the zoo, just a myriad of ferries crisscrossing the harbour, and it's very much how people get to and from work. I think one of the best ways to understand Sydney is to be able to take a boat on the harbour, whether it's a yacht such as this, which takes up to 6 passengers, or a motorboat, or one of the larger, more commercial vessels, or just take a ferry. It's just a really lovely way to understand the city. Important too to recognise that Sydney is surrounded by national parks and bushland, which is unusual for a capital city, and there are great walks all around the harbour, lots of coastal walks that you can do. We can arrange a guide to take you on a walk, or you can just explore on your own. In recent years, Sydney, or Australia in general, has become very much a foodies destination. So many, many years ago, I think we had very stodgy sort of, at the time, British cuisine, but now Australia is very much a multicultural society. The cities are very cosmopolitan, very sophisticated, but yet with that casual sort of Australian feel. Icebergs Dining at Bondi Beach is a lovely restaurant. The last time I was here was in June, and lovely winter's day, bright sunshine, the waters were crystal clear, and the dolphins were just sort of careening through the surf. It was just lovely. Just some of the big events that we have to keep in mind. So in January and February, you have the open air cinema, where the movie screen actually rises out of the harbour. You're sitting outside on seats, and you've got the Opera House and the bridge behind you watching premiere movies. In March and April, in the same location, there's a big platform that's out in the harbour, and this is where we have the Handa Opera. And the theme for the opera is, the dining for the opera is always themed to the actual opera. In May and June, it's a big light and music festival called Vivid, where the buildings of the city are lit up. They're interactive light projects. Because our winter is relatively mild, particularly compared to North America, it's a lovely time to be able to walk around the city and just see some of these light exhibits. And of course, New Year's Eve on Sydney Harbour is always a really, really special event. Spectacular, actually. Just wanted to mention this because you may not be aware of it, but just 2 hours off the coast of Sydney is this breathtaking island called Lord Howe Island. It is the southernmost coral reef, so for anybody who enjoys snorkeling and diving, this area is not affected by the bad weather that can affect the Great Barrier Reef in the summer months. And the island is very, very protected. Very few cars are allowed on the island, so you get around by bike or by golf cart, and only 400 visitors at any one time are allowed. So if you weren't familiar with this, it's just something very special to kind of keep in mind, because it's really worth visiting if ever you had the opportunity. Flying now down to Adelaide in South Australia, and we're going to take a 30-minute flight from Adelaide over to Kangaroo Island. And Kangaroo Island is an absolutely pristine, beautiful island. It's absolutely one of the best, if not the best, places in Australia to see animals in their natural habitat. All the touring is very relaxed. It's done in a 4-wheel drive, and you're literally just stopping in the bush to see animals as they're meant to be seen. So very much in their natural habitat. You can get actually very close to the fur seals on the beach with a guide, but it's amazing how close you can actually be to them. You always stop in the middle of the day for a great casual barbecue lunch in the bush, and we always very much aware of clients' dietary preferences. So if somebody didn't care for seafood, another option would always be presented to them. And just again, some of the wildlife again that you'll see on the island, the New Zealand fur seals, beautiful bird life, and then the echidna. Kangaroo Island is really well known for its seafood because of the cold, clear waters surrounding the island. Produces really well-known honey, olives, eucalyptus, lavender, wine. And then in recent years, they've been producing award-winning spirits. So always fun to kind of visit these places as well when you're on the island. And the climate of the island and just the ambience really does attract a lot of artists and artisans. So you'll find a wealth of art studios, galleries that you can also include in a visit. So it's not just the wildlife, it's actually so much more. And then we're going to fly from Adelaide up to Uluru in Central Australia, which is the heart of Australia. Uluru and Central Australia, just really the heart and soul. This is in the Northern Territory, and Uluru is easily one of Australia's most recognisable landmarks. It rises higher than the Eiffel Tower above the ground, but the bulk of the rock, which is known as an island mountain, is actually underground. And then the surface or the circumference of the rock is about 10 miles. And it is, again, a UNESCO World Heritage Site. The closest accommodation to Uluru, and just an absolutely lovely place, and it is a member of the Luxury Lodges of Australia, is longitude 131. So you can see these tented camps looking directly at Uluru, and it's an all-inclusive experience with your accommodation, meals, and sightseeing included. The luxury tents, there are 16 luxury tents, each with an ensuite bathroom, which is sort of tucked in behind the brown wall that you can see here near the bed. They have unparalleled views of Uluru, great decks where after dinner drinks are served. You can actually sit outside with an after dinner drink around the fire, just enjoy the stars of the Southern Hemisphere. You can actually even sleep on these day beds if you'd like to. So if somebody's really adventurous, they have very luxurious swags, they're called. In other words, it's a sleeping bag, but a very glamorous sort of sleeping bag, which they put on these day beds if you'd like to sleep outside under the stars. But obviously you have your own room to sleep in if you'd like. This is a new development here at Longitude. This is a dune pavilion, which is really a 2-bedroom suite, so ideal for families or for friends who are traveling together. And this is the only property that also has views of both Uluru and Kachajuta, which is the other significant landmark here. Both Uluru and Kachajuta are considered by the local Anangangu people to be sacred ground. And then around Uluru, the base of Uluru, you've got an abundance of springs, waterholes, rock caves, and ancient paintings. Most of the sightseeing is done in the early morning or the late afternoon to take advantage of the weather and also the changing light, because that's something that's really important here. Some of the activities that you can experience apart from guided walks to Uluru and Kachajuta would be helicopter flights, biking, exploring Indigenous art. There's a wonderful community not far from Longitude that guests can visit, where the art is quite well known. And then sunset drinks and canapes at Uluru are very much a feature of the stay, particularly because the light is just ever changing on the rock, and it's quite beautiful. Table 131, the dinner outside under the stars of the Southern Hemisphere. And then after dinner, a guide will explain the constellation to you that you're actually seeing. An experience that's been now at Uluru for a couple of years, it keeps being extended, is a light installation by a well-known British artist, Bruce Munro. It's 50,000 individual spheres of light. So it sort of just adds a whole other aspect to some of the touring that you can do here. Then we're going to fly from Uluru over to Queensland, to Cairns, which is up in the northern part of the state. And we're going to visit the Daintree Rainforest, which is about an hour outside Cairns. It's the oldest rainforest in the world. We recommend Silky Oaks, which is again in the heart of the rainforest, as a place to stay. The same people who own Longitude 131 have just purchased Silky Oaks, and at the moment it's closed for renovation. So they'll be putting a complete redo on the property, and it will be reopened next April. So probably just in time for North American visitors. You can see the accommodation up in tree houses located along the Mossman River. They're all very comfortable. And again, though, this will completely change by next year when it reopens. Each accommodation has a lovely deck area with furniture and a hammock that you can just sit outside and enjoy the rainforest. Just some of the activities, again, swimming in the crystal clear waters, drift snorkeling, kayaking. You can have walks on the boardwalk, which are all through the rainforest or parts of the rainforest, or you can have an Indigenous cultural experience with the local Kuku Yulanji, where you'll learn about the traditional use of plants and medicines and the Dreamtime legends of the rainforest. And as well as the guided walks, that you can also spend time with a naturalist guide and a photographer, because this is really such a beautiful area, and most photographers really enjoy being here. Easy access from Silky Oaks to Cape Tribulation, where two World Heritage areas meet. So you have the rainforest and the reef, both World Heritage areas meeting together. So again, quite a special place. Silky Oaks is a fully inclusive experience, and food and wine is also a very integral and important part of your stay. Varied dining options, whether it's a private dinner that can be set up here in the Jungle Perch, or dinner in the main dining room at the lodge. And then leaving the rainforest for a completely different change of scenery, we go back to Cairns and take the 1-hour flight from Cairns over to Lizard Island, crossing the Great Barrier Reef. And I think this is truly a breathtaking experience to be able to fly over the reef this way, and arriving at Lizard Island, which is the northernmost island resort on Australia's Great Barrier Reef, which stretches for around 1,200 to 1,400 miles sort of down the coast. At Lizard Island, the reef is literally on your doorstep. This is also famous for black marlin fishing, and the season here begins in September. You can see the runway just behind the resort. So it's, as you can see, you're flying directly into the island, and you met and taken immediately to your accommodation. Lizard Island is famous for diving and snorkeling, and the world-famous dive site, the Cod Hole, is just 45 minutes from the resort. Wonderful snorkeling can be right off the beach, or you can go to the clam garden, which is a little bit further away. Every kind of water activity that you can imagine, as well as guided interpretive walks, fabulous spa, yoga classes. There's also a highly recognized research station on the island, which is funded by the Australian Museum, and it's open to guests to visit twice a week. And I think it's a fascinating place. I remember being amazed when I was there last with some young researchers were researching octopus, something to do with octopus and studying for macular degeneration. So it's an excellent facility. And throughout the island, there are many, many small beach areas, and you have access to these motorized dinghies. That's part of your stay. A picnic camper lunch can be packed for you, again, just all part of your stay. And you can sort of go off to one of these private beaches and just have, a really secluded picnic. Lizard, again, completely all-inclusive with different styles of accommodation. The beachfront pavilion is a personal favorite of mine. You literally just step off the veranda and you're on the beach. And it's all quite serene, as you can see, with these sort of muted colors. And then again, changing scenery yet again, we're going to fly down from Cairns. So we'll fly back from Lizard Island over to Cairns, and then fly down to Hobart in Tasmania. Tasmania is the small island state off mainland Australia. It has quite a different vegetation and a different feel from the mainland Australia, because the climate is probably it's not as hot generally as mainland Australia. Hobart has a very strong maritime heritage. Along the waterfront, there are beautiful old Georgian buildings, and every Saturday here they hold the Salamanca markets, which attract a lot of really interesting local artists, as well as people selling local produce. Just outside Hobart, it's a 15-minute catamaran ride down the river, or you can drive, is a somewhat controversial but really, really interesting museum, the Museum of Old and New Art. The man who developed this museum is a brilliant mathematician and has a philosophy that he doesn't really care what people feel about his art, and it ranges from Egyptian antiquities to very, very contemporary, sort of almost confrontational art. But he believes that everybody should be impacted by art. So really interesting experience. And this property, where the museum's located, is also part of a vineyard, the Marilla Vineyard, has great accommodation and 2 really, really good restaurants. Tasmania is known for its seafood and for its cool climate wines, among other things, because in part the seafood is so good, the quality of the seafood is so high, because there is literally no pollution, and the waters surrounding the state are quite cold and pure. A really fun experience is to go out on this boat. All the local seafood is sort of gathered, and then it's prepared for your lunch on the boat and served with then great cool climate Tasmanian wines. Another lovely experience from Hobart is to go around the Tasman Peninsula by boat. Very dramatic sort of peninsula. Interesting wildlife here too. And you then come to Port Arthur, which is our most important historic site in the country, really. It's the site of our convict settlement, penal colony, and it's a fascinating experience to be able to spend some time here and kind of delve back into the very real history of the country. Just outside Hobart again, you have the Bonorong Wildlife Sanctuary, which has a great night tour where you can see some of these animals, including the wombat, and then over here on the right, the Tasmanian devil, which has become a bit of a problem because it has a genetic mutation, and they're really trying to cull groups of the Tasmanian devil and keep them apart from others so that they don't all become extinct. Cradle Mountain, just a really lovely area. You probably don't want to visit this area in winter because it does snow here. Again, wonderful walks in this area. And Tasmania has 2 golf courses that rank in the top 100 in the world. Barnbougle Dunes is one of them. So great golf experiences for any keen golfers. Again, as I've mentioned, the food, the quality of the food, the produce, etc. in Tasmania is just very high, and it has then caused a number of interesting cooking schools to be developed, and the agrarian kitchen is one of these. Again, just lovely scenery. So it's a very diverse sort of different state, and it does have any outdoor activity that you can potentially think of is possible in Tasmania. This photo was taken on one of the 3-day guided walks on Maria Island, but there are many single-day walks, half-day, single-day, or multi-day walks, and he's meeting one of the wombats. Over on the west coast, you have another World Heritage Area. It's absolute wilderness. Very, very beautiful area, and it's only accessible by boat or by plane. And one of the interesting things that you do here when you're on a boat is to stop at an island called Sarah Island, where, again, a huge wealth of convict history, so it makes for a really interesting experience. Wineglass Bay in the Freycinet National Park, north of Hobart, has been described as one of the 10 most beautiful beaches in the world. And in this area of Freycinet Peninsula, here at Coles Bay, you have another outstanding lodge in Australia. This is called Sapphire Freycinet. Very weird looking at it from this angle. The accommodation is absolutely delightful. No detail really has been spared in developing these villas, all of which look out to Coles Bay and the Hazards, which is the rock formation that we're looking at over here. Signature experience when you're staying at Sapphire is to go to the marine farm. You pull on waders and you go out into this marine farm. The guide miraculously sort of pulls out a white linen tablecloth, great local wine, and they shuck oysters in front of you. So you're enjoying fresh local oysters and a glass of wine. Many different activities, of course, to do here. Great boat journeys from Freycinet, and the lodge offers 2 really good cooking classes as well. So it's just a really delightful place to stay, to experience the outdoors, the history, the great food and wine that you can have and experience in Tasmania. So basically that's our quick journey, and thank you so much for joining us this evening.
Well, thanks, Anne. I would like to book a trip there tomorrow. That sounds amazing. The question that was asked that we already have, and I'm going to let you answer it because it's not really an easy answer. Mm-hmm. What is the best time of year to visit Australia if you're very interested in visiting the north, but also interested in Kangaroo Island and Tasmania?
I think Australia is always, everybody says you can visit Australia year round. I think to do both of what you've just mentioned, the spring and the fall. So for us, the fall would be March, April, May, or spring would be September, October, November, are the most delightful times to visit, because you're not going to have the intense heat up in the very far north, up near the reef, or the humidity, and you won't have the cold weather, because the winds coming off the Southern Ocean into Kangaroo Island can be quite cold in the wintertime. So I think the spring and the fall are a good rule of thumb.
Okay, great. Does anybody have any questions for Anne?
I have a question.
Yes, Rochelle.
So Anne, this kind of fell out of the news because of what we're currently living through right now, but how has Kangaroo Island survived after the fires?
They've survived actually amazingly well. And I think that's probably, I think there's a real sense of community in these smaller areas within Australia. I was just listening to a podcast that Swain had done with the owner of a property in the Barossa Valley, which is one of the big wine regions. And he was sort of emphasizing the sense of community and how people have come together. And I think that's so true as to what's happened on Kangaroo Island. Parts of the island were devastated, and the most iconic luxury lodge was burnt. It's owned by the same people who own Longitude 131, Silky Oaks, and then they also own another beautiful lodge on Lord Howe Island. But the lodge will reopen in 2022, and I did just hear today that some of the areas that were affected by the bushfires have now reopened. So the regrowth and the regeneration on the island is, because it's native bush, it does tend to happen quickly. And so you can still go to Kangaroo Island and see all of the animals that you would have seen before. It would be just in different areas. But as I said, I did just hear today that some parts of one particular area have reopened. So it's possible to still travel to Kangaroo Island when obviously the borders reopen, enjoy the wildlife as they're meant to be experienced, and there are different accommodation options on the island, ranging from charming B&Bs to more luxury accommodation. So it's really, it's sort of amazing, I think, how the island has managed to come back stronger than ever after the terrible bushfires earlier this year.
So I have a question, just because I'm so curious about how different countries are handling the coronavirus. Are the different states of Australia, like Queensland, Northern Territory, et cetera, all handling the coronavirus separately, or is there a national plan? How is Australia handling it?
There is a national plan, and there has been a national plan from the beginning. I think unlike New Zealand, which went into complete and utter lockdown for 7 weeks, Australia went into an initial lockdown and then gradually started reopening some areas. Each state is handling the border controls on their own. So, for example, the Northern Territory is only allowing people from certain areas to come in. Western Australia is still closed. So New South Wales and Victoria now, you can't go between the two states, but that's just because of the outbreak in Victoria. But overall, there was a national guideline with state premiers, which is equivalent to governors here, mandating what is happening locally. But I think overall people have been very compliant with the regulations that have been put in place. And seemingly the virus was sort of on its way out, and then just because of some stupid actions in Victoria, they've now had this newest sort of second outbreak.
Okay. And on our Zoom meeting for Ireland and Scotland, the the speaker lives in Ireland, and there's a lot of focus on people traveling locally because they can't leave the country and nobody's coming into the country to support the tourism industry. Is that happening in Australia?
It is very much, but given the fact that some states are still closed to another state, it has made then domestic travel a little bit more difficult. So for example, if I were at home in Sydney, I couldn't fly to Western Australia at the moment because the borders there are closed. So, but the idea really is to encourage domestic travel. And because Australia is such a vast country with huge, huge areas of wide open spaces, once you get away from the immediate coastline, you've got such abundance of areas to go to where you're not in a metropolis. So the opportunities really are really wide for people to travel. And eventually they believe that the borders will open to people from New Zealand. And so New Zealanders will travel within Australia, and then vice versa, Australians will travel in New Zealand. And then ultimately when things on a global level are more settled, the borders to other international countries, and particularly North America, will reopen.
Okay. Do you have a favorite spot in Australia that you're willing to share with us?
I do. Sydney is Sydney would be my favorite because that's one of my favorites because that's my home. But I think of all the other areas that is just very dear to my heart, Tasmania would be my favorite because it's a little bit different from the mainland of Australia. The vegetation is different. There's such a strong sense of the British history still evident, our colonial history. So great architecture, amazing food and wine experiences. And then, as I sort of alluded to, any outdoor activity that you could possibly want is there as well. So, you know, Tasmania is somewhere that I really love visiting.
Thank you. Any other questions? Everybody gonna go to Australia when you're able?